Maybe for my birthday next year, you could get me those 2 hours of my life back.
Maybe for my birthday next year, you could, I don't know, pull your finger out and try and help out on the podcast every now and again. You fucking selfish.
Well, I
didn't even say anything.
Dave, guilty by association. You did not say anything though, did you? You
exactly.
just
I did
stood
not.
there and chuckled. The fucking the Richard Hammond of the group. Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of Films on Trial. I'm Gav.
I'm Alex.
Joel.
And I'm Dave.
And our Kevin Costner season is officially over. And just like Kevin Costner in 2012, we're celebrating a long-awaited return. And that's the return of a Films on Trial favourite, the beloved Halloween Horror Month. And of course, the return of those horrendous sound effects. And if I can tell by all of the immense eye rolling right now that you're not appreciating that.
That one wasn't even scary. What was that?
Have you at least got like some new ones for this year, or
no?
are you just recycling the same?
I feel like after 12 months, a lot of the people might have forgotten what those sound effects were, and they need refreshing. Some people might have said that our Kevin Costner month was horrific enough, but those people are scoundrels. Don't listen to them, all right? What we're doing here throughout October is each one of the Films on Trial gang will be putting a horror film of their choice on trial that they found to be personally unsettling. And first up is Alex, who has stuck a thumb in the eye of the establishment and picked a non-horror film, The Night of the Hunter. So, Alex, is it a horror film, but why have you picked this film?
Controversial to say it's not a horror film. It's not your standard horror film, but I think it's pretty horrific. It's pretty scary stuff. I watched it when I was quite young and was terrified by it. I'm watching it again. You know, it's still even scarier as an adult in ways that I didn't understand as a child. So yeah, it's an absolute classic, and I just thought, yeah, let's put it on. I suppose what you'd say is it's more very disturbing than possibly a classic horror, but I'm going to argue the case that it is a horror.
Mm-hmm. So very disturbing and not that much of a horror. A bit like Ozzy, you'd say, wouldn't you? Right. So, nice point, Alex. So, is The Night of the Hunter the clenched fist of hate or the outstretched fingers of love? Essentially, will this film be placed on our esteemed hit list or our steaming shit list? Now, before we go on, our last film on trial was The Bodyguard. Now, Dave judged that trial and deemed that it should be placed on the shit list. Yeah, he did, yeah. Shit list. He's since gone away and watched the film, so did he make the right call or not, Dave?
Yes, I did. I actually think you guys did a really good job of conveying to me exactly what the film was about, because I stand by what I said at the end of my judgment. I said, I think I'm going to enjoy it, but I don't think it's a good film. And true enough, that was essentially the case. I liked the film. I enjoyed the film. Is it well made? No, not really. The performances are okay. There's nothing special there. There's very little chemistry between the two romantic leads, which is kind of a crucial point of the plot. You know, I can understand why it was such a big hit. You know, the soundtrack's fantastic, but yeah, ultimately you break it down into many pieces and, you know, it doesn't quite equal the sum of all of its parts. It was a good attempt, but it's not great.
Thank you very much, Dave. Well summed up. Also, technically, we did have another trial last week, but somebody, not naming any names, may have accidentally deleted the recording.
Yeah.
2 hours.
Who was it, Gav?
I can't remember. Let's not play the blame game here. Let's not point fingers. All right, we all make mistakes. Okay.
All I'm saying is it's probably out of, I don't know how many episodes we're on now, like 150 or something like that. Like probably the best episode we've ever done. And you deleted it.
Well, to make up for it, what I've decided to do here is I've asked Ozzy to give us a very brief summary of what happened during this trial.
So the trial started with mismatched pair, Joel and Alex. They defended Rush Hour. I mean, they were like chalk and cheese in their work. And then when Dave and I, we kidnapped the ambassador's daughter as part of their prosecution. And then Joel and Alex had to join forces, save the day, and then to try and get Rush Hour onto the hit list. But, I mean, nothing could prepare us for when the actual Jackie Chan made an appearance and delighted us all with his uncanny impression of Tom Wilkinson. The whole trial was an absolute riot. full-on uproar. Everyone laughed so hard. I mean, Dave passed out from exhaustion at one point. Thought we were going to have to try and call an ambulance. Madness when BAFTA dialed in towards the end of the episode and gave us a Best British Podcast Award. Richard Curtis himself presented us with it and said he was so impressed with the show. He'd listened back through the Love Actually and he was so convinced by the prosecution he's decided to retire from filmmaking altogether. So yeah, well, that was that. Rush Hour ended up on the hit list. Everybody celebrated as the credits rolled.
Thank you very much for that, Ozzy. And now on to the trial itself. All of the roles have been picked out of the hat at random. So acting in defense and trying to get this film placed on the hit list will be Alex and Dave. Now, I've gone for classic horror villains here, so brace yourself. Alex is just like Freddy Krueger. He probably heavily features in some children's nightmares. I was thinking when I wrote that, I was like, I wonder if there has been a child who's had a nightmare about him.
Well, they've never mentioned it, but then they wouldn't, would they?
Because I've had a few nightmares about teachers in the past.
I know your teachers still probably wake up screaming, thinking about you, to be honest, Gav. I was there sat next to you. Mr. Devitt probably still hasn't recovered, to be honest. He gave that guy an aneurysm every physics lesson. Never seen anyone literally scream to the point where they were speechless.
If you listen to Mr. Devitt, I'm very sorry.
He's not. As you well know, Mr. Devitt, he's not at all.
Dave is a bit like Hannibal Lecter. He pretends to be very cultured and refined, but we've all seen him eat some pretty horrible shit.
That's quite true as well.
And acting as prosecution and trying to get this film placed on the shit list will be me. And I'm just like the Candyman. I spend a lot of my time looking in the mirror and my insides are rotten. Now, just like real cause advocates, the defense and prosecution will be making the best case for their roles. These may or may not be their real opinions, though, so do stay tuned until the end of the episode to hear their genuine thoughts. And this week, Joel will be playing the judge, and he has to decide which list the film should be placed on hit or shit, based solely on the arguments put to him and not using his own opinions. And Joel is just like Jason Voorhees, the strong and silent type. I'm sorry, Joel. It felt a bit of a letdown. I was going to say
there was going to be something else coming, to be honest.
But I was going to say that you had a love of sports that was just surface level.
Now, the insult you would throw at Jason Voorhees.
Instead of being a hockey fan. Now, before we get started, I think we should give the audience a bit of a better understanding as to what this film is all about. So let us spin the wheel of impressions. I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Has that changed? That was like a bird,
yeah,
or like R2D2.
Well, in the beginning, he kind of goes like, oh, and then there's just a noise, so you just got to guess what animal it was. Anyway, as you can all see here, it's landed on Alex. So, how would we like Alex to read out the synopsis? What we do here is we read off the synopsis of the film in the style of one of the cast or characters from the film. I think it can only be...
It's got to be Mitchum, hasn't it?
Mitchum, yeah.
It's got to be Robert Mitchum.
I mean, it's just a southern drawl sort of thing. Am I going for? I don't know if I can do a Robert Mitchum. A religious fanatic marries a gullible widow whose young children are reluctant to tell him where their real daddy hid the $10,000 he's stolen in a robbery.
Yeah, no, pretty much Mitchum. Pretty much Mitchum.
Never done a Mitchum before. It's my best shot.
Yeah, I think that was pretty decent, to be honest.
I liked it.
Thank you.
You can add that to your one-man repertoire.
Thanks. Can I add Max von Sydow? Will you let
He's
me
already
have
in
that
it. You got
He's
one
in
side
it.
off.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Cheers. Thanks, man.
Who else
the
was
nicest
he?
thing you said to me. Well, Werner Herzog, I'm still working on. But
Werner Herzog.
he's not ready. He's not ready.
Okay, so without further hesitation, Joe, would you like to please kick off proceedings?
All right, well, I think I've heard everything I need to hear, so... Alex, obviously this is your pick, so I'll let you go first. So just looking for kind of a brief synopsis, almost like what you might find on the back of a DVD case. And I take it this is a pretty old film, so just along with the synopsis, how do you think that, the plot and the kind of, horror in this film holds up to today's standards as well?
Sure. Okay. It's not a complicated plot. It's fairly straightforward. You've got a preacher or sort of a man who, is an imposter or sees himself as a preacher, played by Robert Mitchum. So his name's Harry Powell. He is you realize early on quite a bit of a maniac, quite insane. You sort of see him at the point when he's watching women dancing, and he looks like he's like clenching his fist. He's becoming, so that he's a bad guy. He ends up in jail because he's stolen a car, but he ends up in jail with a thief who's robbed a bank, killed 2 people, but has hidden the money. Now, you see in a scene where the only people who know where he's hidden the money are his children. He's got 2 children, one a sort of a boy around about 10 and a younger girl about 5 or 6 years old. No one knows that the children know, but they all know that he's stolen $10,000 and it must be hidden somewhere. So the preacher hears about this. The thief who's killed people is put on death row. And when the preacher gets out of jail, is let out, he travels to the town and insinuates himself and ends up marrying the widow of the thief who was killed on death row. Because in an attempt to try and find the money. Over a few scenes, you sort of start to realize, he starts to figure out that the kids know where the money is, and he starts to target them and to harass them. He then kills the mother because the mother gets onto him and starts realizing what he's doing. And at this point, he's turned the whole town into sort of religious fervor. And then the sort of second act in the film is the preacher, Robert Mitchum, chasing these children as they try to escape him. They get on a boat, escape him, and he travels after them over weeks. This chase happens for over the sort of course of the middle part of the film, until a kind woman saves them and sort of takes them into like a sort of an orphanage and looks after them. And in the end, there's a showdown where the preacher sort of finds them, and he sort of, that's the culmination of the film. It is, and this film was made in 1955. And so, it's strange to think really that a film in 1955 could be horrific. But this film really is. And it's not because of particular jump scares. And it's not because, I would say, particularly because, like people look scary. It's just the themes that are running throughout it. You've got you wouldn't have this film now. And it's because in the 50s, they would do certain things in stories that I don't think we'd quite have the guts to do now. So even though we'd have horrific sadism in films, I don't think you'd have a film of 2 children being just relentlessly pursued by a man who's just out to kill them. I mean, he's chasing them with a knife, and there's these beautiful, amazing shots when he's reaching out, his hands are reaching up a dark staircase to try and grab him. It's not like your classic horror. It's not, and I don't think the film was trying to be, because it's 1955, but it is deeply unsettling. There's a big theme running through it of sort of good and evil. You've got the preacher who's meant to be, obviously as a preacher, he's meant to be a good character, isn't he? And he's got this love and hate on his knuckles. But the way that it's explored is very mature for a film in the 1950s. Sex is a big part of this film, and it's kind of surprising when you're watching it to see that sex is such a big part of it. He's a preacher who hates women. This is a man who absolutely hates women, and you see him right at the beginning. He's got a knife and he wants to hurt them. He then, when he marries the widow, he puts forward abstinence and says that she's dirty because she wants to have anything to do with him in the bedroom. He says that's not what a women's body is for. She's had children. There's no need for that anymore. And, there's other characters where they discuss, and the women are saying women shouldn't want that from it, but women shouldn't want sex. And then you have even a character later on, a girl who's at the orphanage called Ruby, who goes out and tries to go with men. And the film discusses good and evil through sex, and through how women enjoy it and how they shouldn't enjoy it, and moral and abstinence. It's a fascinating film. It's not your classic horror. I'm sure when we watch other horror films in this, we'd be watching more sort of your jump scares and ghosts and stuff like this. But the themes, the fact that the film goes to places where you've got kids being chased, you've got when their mum is stabbed. It's very shocking for a film at any time, but especially from the 1950s. And I think just from the way it's directed, and it's inspired, from Knuckles on the love and hate, it's inspired many, many characters. And it's an absolute classic So not your standard horror, but its own thing and horrific enough.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Gav, you've seen plenty of horror. Some might say too much. How did you fare with this film? The plot sounds fairly unique to me. It doesn't sound like anything that I've heard before. And for the 1950s, it sounds like it's quite a revolutionary film. Do you agree with those points?
Well, Alex said that you wouldn't get a film these days where the duration of it is basically a man trying to kill a kid. What about Home Alone, Alex?
I stand corrected. I withdraw my argument.
Case closed. But listen, this isn't a horror film. I'm sorry. It's not scary. It's not even really unsettling. Mitchum's performance is quite unnerving at times. I think I would say the first 40 minutes, maybe 50 minutes, he is quite menacing. But then it's counteracted by this Mr. Bean-like performance. His character does a complete 180. And I'll go into a bit more detail about that later on. But
Mr. Bean-like performance.
yeah, that scene where the kids escape him, where he gets his hand trapped in the door. And he's
Does he run
"Oh!"
over a rake and it hits him in the face?
But the boundaries aren't being pushed as much as Alex thinks either. I will grant that I think Willa's character, Shelley Winters was it? Yeah. When she's murdered, that was surprising. I was genuinely taken aback by that. However, I mean, nothing else is really surprising in the film. If maybe one of the kids was murdered, I would have been like, wow, that is very surprising. But I don't think that's the case.
You're a sick man, Hansen. You're a sick man. Yeah.
So the film was initially a major box office disappointment. It went massively over budget, massively over schedule, and received critical and audience backlash. And it resulted in Charles Lawton, the director, never directing a film again. I know Dave's probably going to come back on that and say, well, technically, he moved into the theatre, but he didn't produce a major Hollywood film again because he had such a bad time.
I was going to say, I've had speech therapy. I don't talk like that anymore.
Now, somewhere along the line, there has been a massive 180, and it is now considered a masterpiece, and I genuinely don't understand why. See, I, like Alex, watched this when I was very young, and I remember it being fantastic. I remember it a bit incorrectly, though, because I thought it ended with Robert Mitchum wading through the water, swinging this knife, trying to attack the kids, and then he's arrested. That doesn't happen. That happens just before the kids escape on the boat, as Alex mentioned before. At that point in the film, it all goes downhill for me. That's where the film stops being interested. With the exception of the majority of Mitchum's performance, so up until that 40, 50-minute mark, whenever that happens, it's quite an average film. The rest of the performances range from subpar to, frankly, pretty shit. The direction is bang average. The story is interesting up until that point that I mentioned. Granted, not captivating or even unique, but it is interesting. However, it falls completely apart halfway through, and you end up losing interest in the plot and the outcomes of any of the characters. I said before, it's not a horror film. It's not very tense. And towards the end, I don't even know what it is. The last 20 minutes or so, it's almost like I was watching It's a Wonderful Life. It's completely pointless. Night of the Hunter, I'd rather have a night in and watch MILF Hunters instead.
And yet you're not going to edit that.
You could have said Storage Hunters. You didn't.
You chose not to.
That was a choice.
Gav sold me, to be honest with you there. I think we'd all rather have a night in with Storage Hunters. So, Dave, I just want to quickly get your view. Alex says, it's not conventional horror, but it is quite disturbing. Seeing certain events unfold. Gav obviously completely disagrees. What's your take on it?
First of all, I'd just like to come back on a couple of absolute lies that Gav just told me.
What?
Gav says it went way over budget. It didn't. It stayed within its budget. Gav says the shooting ran way over. It didn't. It was a 36-day shoot. It was all done perfectly in time.
Don't try and out-fact check, Dave.
I'm fact-checking. I'm fact-checking. He is correct in that this is the one and only film that Charles Lawton ever directed. Now, he was excited to get this project, and he brought so many elements to this. He loves silent cinema, which wasn't that long ago when you think this was made. So he was excited to bring these silent cinema aspects to it, the visual flair that he brought to it. And the sad story is that a lot of cinemas didn't want to stock this. because they were a bit jaded about basically a religious figure being the villain. They were scared of the fact that a preacher would be the main antagonist. This unnerved them somewhat. Also, the film was completely screwed over by the distributor, United Artists. United Artists were meant to put this out. They were meant to put money into marketing. It was very lackluster. They did not publicize this film at all. They put it on a double bill alongside Robber's Roost, which is one of those B-movie westerns we've never heard of since. The producer of the film actually fell out with United Artists after this and parted company with them because he felt they'd shown such disrespect to the film. Charles Lawton had put his heart and soul into this, done a fantastic job of directing, far beyond the bang average that Gav says. And he was heartbroken. He was just heartbroken by the film. Yeah, it was a box office failure because of what the distributor did. And he didn't want to direct
because it was a bit shit, was it?
Not at all. Not at all. Yeah, Charles Lawton was just heartbroken by it, so he didn't direct again. And just to say about the horror aspect, I see this as more of a thriller, but it is a scary thriller, and it certainly does. The performance of Robert Mitchum goes far beyond unnerving. He is terrifying. The presence of this man, and not just Robert Mitchum's performance, but the way Charles Lawton shoots him and directs him, the use of the silhouette and the use of the visual flair that comes alongside the character. This character is more than just a little bit unsettling. He is scary. And bear in mind, this film is shown from a kid's perspective. That is where the fear element comes into play. The fact that, it's why It Chapter 1 was scarier than It Chapter 2. Put yourself in a child's perspective, and these things are much more scary. A madman with a knife it may as well be a vampire or a zombie to a child. This is frightening stuff. And there is a jump scare in it. One of the earliest jump scares I think we've seen in cinema. The first jump scare I think in modern cinema was 1942's Cat People with the Luton bus. So this jump scare occurs towards the end of the film when Robert Mitchum comes back to attack the kids when they're at Rachel's place. That's the old lady that's taking them in. And there's a bit where he sits outside on the lawn and he's singing, kind of trying to rattle them inside so they're singing loud enough they can hear him. Rachel's out on the porch with a shotgun, making sure he doesn't move, that he doesn't come inside. As soon as he's on her property, I guess she can shoot him. She gets distracted momentarily by Ruby, one of the girls, coming down, and at that point he vanishes. He's gone. She blows out a candle. Once the light's gone, you can see outside again. He's gone. She rallies the kids quickly, all this panic and whatever. He's in the house somewhere. They don't know where. They go in the kitchen. He's talking to her from the kitchen. She knows he's in there, but she doesn't know where. And then all of a sudden, the cat, he stands on the cat. The cat screams. He stands bolt upright, and he's about this close to the screen. He's a few feet in front of her, and he's right up in the viewer's face. It is one of the earliest jump scares. It's a classic, and it really does rattle you. So yeah, I'd say this is scary. There is that jump scare. There are real chilling moments, particularly to Mitchum's performance more so than anything else. He was terrifying in this. For a man who once said, he did a lot of westerns, just to clarify. He said, I have two acting styles, with horse and without. And he did himself a discredit. He was a fantastic actor with fantastic range that really went above and beyond on this role.
Okay, Gav, I can see you've got your hand up nice and politely there.
Thank you very much. I think these two are massively overselling this. There's no way that either of them found it genuinely scaring or unsettling. Granted, Mitchum's performance is pretty decent for most of the film, but I wouldn't say that either of them were scared at any point.
Speak for yourself, Gav. Can't tell me what I felt.
I know. I can see in your eyes, Alex. I know when you're lying. With regards to the story, as I said before, the story starts off well. The script starts off well. But once Harry has infiltrated the family and murdered Willa, the film shifts to a much slower pace and it loses confidence in itself and it begins to unravel. Mitchum goes from a collected and menacing presence to, as I mentioned before, a bumbling con artist, a bit like our mates Harry and Marv from Home Alone. After Harry murders Willa, there is nothing in the way of him and the kids. He threatens to beat and even kill John if he doesn't tell him where the money is. And that's when Willa was alive. So now Willa is dead. You really fear for the kids. So what does he go and do? He makes himself a big, massive dinner and says to the kids that they won't get any unless they tell them where the cash is. It just feels a bit anticlimactic. It's not as menacing as I thought it would be.
And then pulls the knife out on them.
Yeah, I mean, even the way he pulls the knife out at them. Even the way he pulls the knife out, it's not menacing. He just kind of goes, "Hey, do you know what this is?" It's like it's a knife, yeah. There is a slightly menacing bit later on when he puts the kid's head against the apples and he gets the knife. That is more menacing. If that would have happened before, I would have been like, oh yeah, I feel some genuine fear here, or there's something to fear. But now the kids tell him that the money's in the cellar. He goes down to the cellar and then he gets outsmarted by the kids. And they manage to evade him. They trap his fingers in the door. He howls. He is hopping up and down, sucking his fingers. It's just a bit comedic. Then there's this long section where the kids float downstream on a rowboat whilst Harry pursues them on horseback. They go from place to place before they're eventually taken in by Rachel, as Dave said before, who looks after a number of the orphans. Then Harry goes around the town asking questions about the kids and finds out where they're located after he goes on some weird date with one of the older orphans. And I was thinking, right, okay, what's he going to do next? Is he going to try and abduct the kids by night? Is he going to try and storm the house? No, he literally just pitches up a few days later. So it's not even immediate, a few days after that. And he just asks for the kids. And when John says that he isn't his real father, Rachel chases Harry off. He menacingly says, oh yeah, I'll be back later. Once again, I was excited to see what dastardly plan he would come up with. And he's literally just sitting in the front garden singing. And then Dave's big sort of surprise thing, he just gets bored, presumably. And then he moves into the house. He gets shot by Rachel. It looks like he's shot in the arse. He makes this ludicrous hee-hawing sound like a donkey and runs into the barn. And then the police pitch up and arrest him. John, who is fed up of hiding the money any longer, reveals it to the police and the film ends, or at least it should end. It should end, but it goes on for
He's fed up of hiding the money. What?
Fed up of hiding the money. What?
Wait, he says I have the money back.
No, he's not bored of keeping the money, is he? It's not what happens.
Yeah, I'm generalising. But anyway, the film goes on for another 20 minutes. And you're just really thinking, why is this film continuing? It isn't. It goes into the courtroom scene. Then Rachel and the kids are trying to have dinner at the restaurant before they're confronted by an angry mob of protesters who want to confront Harry. Yeah, and then there's this bizarre, really long scene where Rachel gives the kids Christmas presents and delivers several lines to the audience about how great kids are. It should have ended ages before that. It just feels like it's been dragged on and it ends up being some other film. It isn't menacing, it isn't scary, it isn't thrilling anymore. Like a damp squib.
Alex, I can see you getting visibly distressed.
yeah.
So just a quick one before you come back on Gav's point. How long is the film?
It's a very short film. I don't know exactly, but I mean, it's about an hour and a half.
40, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. It's
about an hour and a half. So, and it's Charles Lawton was a theatre director, and so this is very much a 3-act thing. It knows exactly what it's doing. You've got the first act, which is setting up the story and the preacher and the money. You've got the second act where he's sort of trying to get the cash when he's there, and then the third act is the chase and the kids running away and stuff like that. It's a very tightly wound film. So at no point do you really feel like anything's going on too long. And you got the horror, which is the horror of being a helpless child. This Harry doesn't, the preacher doesn't at the end is very powerful all the way through. At the beginning of the film, he insinuates and he uses his charm as well as his knife to get what he needs, and he cons people. So he's doing what he's done the whole way through. The beauty of this film is right towards the end when you meet the Rachel Cooper character, who's the only good character in it, including all the way through it, the kids are the only good characters in it. Even their uncles are drunk and leaves them to their fate. Their dad is a thief who is killed on death row. Their mum is a simpleton and a bit of an idiot and is easily swayed and ends up dying. The preacher, obviously by Robert Mitchum, is one of the most horrendous characters ever. There's a great character called Icy Spoon, who, best name ever, who just sort of sums up America's morality and stupidity. And this is what the children are surrounded by. There's no way of saving them. They're completely helpless for the first 2 acts of the film. And it's only when they get to this bit at the end, when they meet Rachel, that they can finally, they're running away from them. They're trying to keep this $10,000 that's now in the girl's stuffed doll, and they're running away. And it's when they meet this woman who's just amazing. I mean, how many times have been talking on this podcast about having a strong female role? Well, this is 1955, and this is a woman at the end who's quite elderly, and she looks after kids. She's a vulnerable woman, and she is the only one that stands up for these kids and saves them at the end. She is the strong character and moral character in this film, and that's beyond that, and that's really very, very, that's way beyond its time. So she brings the hope at the end, and she brings these fantastic, I mean, Gav's talking about this character Ruby who goes on a date with the preacher. One of my favorite lines in it is Ruby goes, and she's sort of, basically in those times she would have been as some sort of like, a harlot, a woman who goes in, she tries to find boys, and she ends up being taken by this preacher. And the Icy Spoon character, or the preacher, would castigate her for it. She's a harlot, she's a slut, she's a woman who doesn't, she just wants an easy time of it. She just wants men. And, morality of America at the time would have been right, way behind her on this. But this beautiful Rachel Cooper character who saves the day, Ruby comes back and confesses it to her. And she says, "Oh, Ruby, you're just looking for love." And honestly, it got me a little bit. You're just looking for love. And that's, and that's fine. Don't be ashamed of yourself. I understand why you're doing. You've done the wrong thing. And at the very end, a bit where I'm not afraid to say I cried at the end, is when and I think this is when Gav said this is what got me. Sorry, I'm calming down now. But when the boy gives the money at the end, it's because it triggers his memory of what happened to his dad. It's shot in a very way. I'm sure we'll come on to direction. The direction's just stunning. But it's shot in the same way at the beginning of the film when the police come to get the dad. It's done in the same way, so it recalls that. And the police get Robert. Just
to kind of cut you off there, would you say, you said he got triggered there. Would you say that you also got triggered by Gav?
I would say, I mean, as we all know, we all find Gav constantly triggering. It's hard not to be triggered by Gav. But yeah, just to finish off my point, the boy at the end sees this happening to Robert Mitchum, and he sort of realizes what he's been doing, which is he just wanted the money. And he runs out and he's like, "No, don't hurt him. Don't hurt him." And he sort of becomes a more moral character than even the preacher. And he wants to give him the money. Just take the money. Don't hurt him. Just go away. Just be okay with the money. And that, honestly, it really, really got me. So yeah, I think it's not your normal horror. And I can see why possibly it didn't do well at the box office, because it's an original film. It's hard to put into any box because it's so original. It is very much its own thing. The Night of a Hunter is the Night of a Hunter, and it's not been replicated. And I think that's why it's easy to say, "Oh, it's not this, it's not that," because it's very much its own thing, and it's beautiful. Horror, disturbing, beautiful, and very hopeful.
Thanks for that, Alex. Very passionate.
It's a bit too passionate, if you ask me.
I'm very passionate.
Dave, I'm going to come to you now. Mm-hmm. We'll move on to the direction and the script as kind of like a dual point, if you like. How do you think this film is directed? Obviously, they don't have the technology that they had these days in 1955. So how do they kind of...
No explosions.
No.
How's Joel going to be able to watch this?
Lamentably not.
How do they kind of compensate for that? And, in terms of the script, is there any kind of good lines of dialogue that maybe make the film a little bit more chilling and, that type of thing?
No problem. Right. Well, the direction. First of all, it's interesting what you say about, they didn't have much in the way of equipment back then. They were still working it out as they went. And I did notice they did this amazing. It was done by the second unit, this one, but the opening panning shot, where they discover Harry Powell's first victim in the basement. She's kind of on the stairs and kids discover her while they're playing a game. And they've got this amazing panning shot that's coming in. And I'm watching it thinking, they didn't have drones.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been able to afford a plane or a helicopter. How did they do that? How did they get that shot? And I still don't know how second unit did that. It is amazing the number of techniques that they incorporated into making this film. Charles Lawton, like I said, he was inspired by silent cinema, which is telling a story when you can't have dialogue, when you can't have anyone speaking to each other. How do you convey what's going on the screen and make people understand? And his imagery in this is sensational. The scene where, in particular, the scene that stands out for me is where Harry Powell kills the children's mother, Willa. And she's kind of lying in bed in their bedroom, and she's coming to the realization of what his motive was. She realizes he's lied. She doesn't have the strength to fight him, and he's kind of standing in the window. The lighting in this scene is incredible, and even the design of their bedroom is kind of it's almost like a chapel and yet a tomb at the same time, which is quite apt given the scene that is unfolding in front of you and how it ends with Harry murdering her. The cinematics in this are stunning, absolutely amazing. I mean, this wasn't a big budget. It all had to be done on sound stages over in Hollywood, but Charles Lawton made the best of what he had available and created such a rich tapestry here. How you felt these kids were traveling down this river, going from town to town, trying to evade Harry Powell. When you think there weren't many exterior shots, and yet you genuinely feel when you're watching this during those chase sequences that this is outside. So good with the set design, so good was Charles Lawton's direction and the way that he put these shots together. It's absolutely fantastic. And when it comes to the getting performances out of his actors, I mean, he helped Mitchum along with this one in a big way. Like I say, Mitchum wasn't confident in himself. I mentioned the horse quote before, but he got great performances out of these actors. Charles Lawton himself was an Oscar-winning actor. He was won an Olivier Award for his time on stage. He knew how to help actors along and how to help them achieve their best. And he did that tenfold on this one. I remember there was a story about Robert Mitchum's audition, and Charles Lawton was trying to explain to him the character. And he said, look, essentially, he's a diabolical shit. And Mitchum put his hand up and went, present. So it was like, it was this great kind of understanding between them. He really knew how to work with these actors. So as far as direction goes, I think it's absolute criminal, to be honest with you, that Charles Lawton never directed another film, just because the distribution company screwed this one over so badly and absolutely broke his heart. He didn't have the fight in him to make another one. He thought, oh no, maybe it was terrible, maybe it wasn't for me. But the fact that long after Charles Lawton has gone, the film has been preserved in the National Archives of United States Cinema, I think goes to show you how it is revered these days and how many people have come around to the way of thinking that, what, this was just bad marketing. This film is an absolute classic. So direction, big thumbs up from me. And the script, I think, it's sold by its actors. It was adapted from a novel. It was adapted from a book that was released 2 years previous by Davis Grubb. And he based the book on the actual crimes of a serial killer called Harry Powers. You didn't stretch the name too far from the truth on that one, who was known as the Lonely Hearts Killer. So there's a lot of truth to what goes on here. So it's quite an accurate script in a lot of ways. The best scenes and the best dialogue come from Mitchum. His sermon about love grappling with hate as he explains these tattoos on his knuckles. It's just one of the best soliloquies in modern history. And Gav's giggling about something, but
Alex, when you mentioned that scene, Alex's face, the noise he made, it's like he's just eating a delicious cake.
Yeah, because I remembered it, and it tastes great when you remember the memory of it's that good.
Good script, good direction. In conclusion,
okay, Dave has sold that pretty well, Gav. But at the same time, I've played The Thing with Dave. I know how. I know how we can deceive people.
I too am diabolical shit.
So what have you got to say for yourself?
The only real crime here is that Charles Lawton got away with making people believe that he's a good director. What Charles Lawton was able to do was assemble a good team behind him. So I'm not going to deny that the cinematography is really good. I did really enjoy that element of the film. I think that some of the way the film is framed is absolutely beautiful. I really like the lighting as well and the set design. I think that's all great. Direction, though, I did think that it fell down. This is Charles Lawton's directorial debut. Dave said that he was into theatre before. He directed a lot of theatre productions. That is massively different from a film. And this is where I think the problem lies. So I don't know if he knows how to film a scene properly. That sounds really condescending. But some of the shots linger a bit too long, or the scene is cut a little bit too short. Some of his shot choices are a bit questionable. For example, choosing to focus on a wider group, having a wider lens, as opposed to one character who is talking or reacting, or vice versa. So there's sometimes when there's a scene and it's the group of children and it's Rachel and Mitchum's character there, and I would much rather be looking directly at how Harry is reacting to this, or how Rachel reacts to what Harry says, as opposed to having the kids in the scene as well, because they're not adding anything to it. And for me, it was just distracting. There are choices to inject humour into scenes where they feel a little bit out of place and almost contradictory to the scene, or insert dialogue in scenes where silence would have been more affecting. As I said before, I mentioned about that scene where the kids managed to evade Mitchum's character. That just felt a little bit comedic for me. And there's other elements, like later on when I said he gets shot in the arse and he runs off to the barn, that once again.
He does not get shot in the arse.
Where does he get shot? Where does he get shot?
You don't know.
He gets
He
clipped.
Wounded.
He's facing her. So I'll tell you one place he didn't get shot, and that's the arse.
The bullet ricocheted off something, hit him smack bang in the arse, and he runs off. And he's honestly, the noise is very comical. And one thing that I don't like here, Dave said that he liked this. Alex mentioned before that the kids are away for a number of weeks. I didn't really get a good sense of time or setting. I genuinely don't know how long this boat journey that they took was. Was it days? Was it weeks? How far did they travel? I've got no idea. Why wasn't Mitchum's character able to catch up with them on horseback? Why, in some scenes, is he very, very near? Like we were talking about that scene where, there's a silhouette of him on horseback. He's essentially within about 100 feet of them. And yet he doesn't approach them. Whereas later on in the film, it feels like they're absolutely miles apart. The setting also, I didn't really get. I didn't know how far a distance it was between the original town, are we in a big city here? Why is there no police presence? Why at the end is there this massive kind of feel like there's a whole community here? There's lots of police. There's a massive angry mob. But then again, Rachel and the kids are there, and it's almost like they've been able to travel there without any issues at all. So how far away do they live from the original setting? There are so many tales as well about this film, from Charles Lawton, from the writer James Agee, from the producer Paul Gregory, Robert Mitchum himself, and several other cast members. Massively contradictory as to how well this film was shot. A lot of people saying that there was massive problems with the director and the directing. They said that the director absolutely hated the kids and couldn't actually direct them. So Robert Mitchum ended up having to direct the scenes with the children in. Then there's contradictory reports from the producer saying that Robert Mitchum was a drunk and he sometimes would fail to pitch up for shoots because he'd be too drunk. There was a report that
we've all been there, though.
Well, I was going to say we've all definitely been in this bit. There was a reported fracas where Mitchum pitched up for recording. He was told that he was late and he was drunk and he wouldn't be filming that day. So in protest, he walked into the producer's room and urinated on the floor. Now we've all been there.
That's classic Aussie.
And Dave said before that there wasn't a delay. There actually was a delay because Robert Mitchum had to go off and film another film. So there was a pause made to the film. And so the final scene where he's arrested wasn't actually recorded until this second film that Mitchum was working on was finished. So there was a massive delay to getting that bit done. And some of the producers were actually a bit bitter because they were like, well, if you would have pitched up, if you would have given it your all throughout, then we would have been able to get those scenes done and we wouldn't have had to pause this, stretch the budget, stretch the schedule. And then maybe they might not have had too many issues with the production company releasing the film. I don't know. All I'm saying is there sounded like a lot of problems. It sounded like it was too much for a new director making his debut who had no experience of filming a film before. He'd previously worked with theatre, and I think this was just too much for him. With a star of Mitchum's magnitude, star power, who was a big presence, maybe a bit of an ego, that the director really struggled to contain.
Hey, thanks for that, Gav. It's interesting because it's polar opposites to what Alex is saying, so one of you selling me up the river here. It's hard to see who it is, but Alex, I can see you're crying into your pot noodle a bit there. So.
No, just there's always problems and there's always stories going on. I think a lot of the stuff that Gav's talking about, I saw as well. I think came from a Robert Mitchum autobiography, which I think was debunked quite a lot. Like he said he directed the kids. I think most people agree that Charles Lawton did. This was Charles Lawton's directorial debut in cinema. But he was very, well-renowned actor, and he was absolutely fantastic in this. Like I say, like Dave said, it's an absolute crying shame that he never came back to it. He had a background in theatre, and you can see that comes across. So it's not something against him; it comes across in the films, and often, to be honest, in the 50s, it was a revolving door between theatre and cinema. It's not the difference that we have now. He was absolutely fantastic, and there's a lot of shots that I think required that theatrical direction because it's not done on location. It's quite a lot of a lot of stages. I think that really helped. Just adding on to what Dave said, there's an amazing bit where it's shot underwater when they find the woman in the water. It's absolutely haunting. You want to see horror, see the death of the mum when she's in the car underwater. In the 1950s, you've never seen anything like it, and you don't see anything really these days. just to go quickly through the actors, I know we've talked about Robert Mitchum. I think we can all agree that he was astoundingly good in this, even if he did turn up pissed to set. He still, give that man a drink because fuck it, whatever he needs. You know what I mean? He knew what he was doing here.
Didn't Bob Hoskins also turn up pissed to set on Super Mario?
Yeah, for different reasons.
And it sounds like it was the same reason.
The child actors are incredible, especially again, for the 50s. They're really, really good. Like, the young girl, it's hard to get a performance of that caliber, but they really do. The boy as well. Gav was saying that there's some weird shots. I honestly don't know what he's talking about. There's some shots that are interplaying between Robert Mitchum and the boy, because they are really the protagonist and antagonist, where Robert Mitchum's sort of figuring out what the boy's, thinking, and he keeps asking him little questions and trying to tease out this information in the second act. And their interplay is astoundingly good for any time. I think the rest of the cast, especially, I love that Icy Spoon. And I think the character of Rachel Cooper and, Shelley Winters, Lillian Gish, who plays Rachel Cooper, and Shelley Winters, absolutely amazing in this. Fantastic performances and very strong, female performances as well. Again, quite shocking for the time and quite surprising. So, for me personally, and this is where I can end it. For me, this film is no perfect. Direction, action. Direction. It's not really an action film. Direction, the performances, and yeah, okay. I mean, what you could say is I picked it for Halloween Horror Month, and is it a classic horror film? But it's definitely its own thing, and I found it extremely disturbing. So for me, it's just a no perfect film.
Okay, before we go to you, Gav, I'm just going to get Dave's thoughts on the performances and the cast. Is this something that do you echo Alex's thoughts, or?
Very much, yeah. I pretty much agree with what Alex said. I mean, Shelley Winters, I thought was great, who plays the kid's mom, Willa. Shelley Winters, in her autobiography, actually said this is probably the most thoughtful and reserved performance she's ever given. It's one of the ones she was most proud of. Lillian Gish, I thought, was fantastic. She was a silent movie star originally, which is one of the reasons Charles Lawton was so keen to work with her. I mentioned how he wanted to recreate a bit of the magic of the silent film. And she's one of the stars who was able to actually transition from silent film into the talkies. And she was fantastic. She was just a fantastic performance from her as the kind of the children's savior towards the end of the film. The kids themselves, like I say, kids in older films in particular, the child actors weren't really up to much. These kids are surprisingly good, I thought. They did really good work, especially when they've got to act so scared and terrified of their stepfather and running away from him and what have you. I thought Peter Graves, the kid's dad, although it's a small role, he did a great job. And of course, one of the greatest movie villains of all time is Reverend Harry Powell, played by Robert Mitchum. This performance was an absolute tour de force. He's regarded as one of the best actors of the golden age of Hollywood, and I'd say this is his standout performance. It's absolutely perfect from him, for all of his self-deprecating humor, and maybe he did turn up pissed, I don't know, but the guy was fantastic, and clearly this was the role he was born to play. It was a role many actors wanted to shy away from just because they were so afraid. Gary Cooper was offered it, but he's like, no, I don't want to play a serial killing preacher. It's like, you crazy, it'll tank my career. So many actors were afraid to do it. Robert Mitchum wasn't. He wanted this role. And you look at his performance, you see what magic he created, you can see why.
Okay, Gav, it's your turn to finally just fire that final nail into the coffin.
Yeah, Robert Mitchum, as I said before, he is quite unnerving in certain parts, but I was very unsatisfied with his performance. I don't know whether it's because, I built up his performance in my head and it could never live up to what I thought it was. Maybe it's because I thought that he'd given this sinister tour de force over the years and it would never live up to those expectations. But also because it's just not as menacing as it should be. There are scenes in it, which I've alluded to earlier, where Mitchum tries to grab the kids and misses, and then some pots fall on his head. And then he traps his finger in the door and jumps up and howls and sucks his fingers. This is like fucking Home Alone stuff. I'm not joking. I did laugh.
No, you are joking. That doesn't happen.
It does happen.
That doesn't happen. He, at no point does he suck his fingers. Right? He chases the kids up the stairs. They slam the door shut on his hand, and he screams and has to pull his hand out of the way. He does not then hop on the ground sucking his fingers. He does not.
And listen, I was expecting him to put one foot in an empty mock bucket and then his pants to fall down. It's very cartoonish when it happens, and it is strikingly different to how the character is portrayed earlier. That's my thing. Obviously, I'm exaggerating here a bit, but the setup of the character is different to how it appears later on in the film. It just gets less and less menacing. So by the end of the film, the character is almost softened. You feel less threatened by him. He's less fearful. I checked to see why this was, and I read that the director, Charles Vaughan, was afraid that the character of Harry Powell was so evil that it could potentially ruin Mitchum's career. So they injected a little bit of humour in there to emphasise the absurdity of the preacher's beliefs, and that they made the character a borderline, and this is their quote, a borderline buffoon to make the children's escape and eventual victory over him more believable. So I can understand why they did that. I understand why it is a bit haphazard, but I think that it's a massive negative impact on the character then, who started off with so much promise but completely lost their steam and ended up as a bit of a joke. I'll agree that Shelley Winters as Willa Harper is really decent in the film. Everybody else is quite average or pretty shit. I'm sorry, but the two actors, I don't know what film Alex and Dave have been watching here. They're not good. The lads who played John hung up his acting boots just 4 years later. The girl who played Pearl never appeared in anything ever again. And it's not surprising because they were both awful. I genuinely laughed out loud when John responded to his father getting arrested with, "No, don't." Like, that is, like, I'm sorry, but Joel could have done a better job of expressing emotions there. So Alex said this is a no perfect film, but let's not forget that Alex said Tomorrow Never Dies was the perfect James Bond film. So these jackasses will have you believe that this film is as good as the hype. But I'm sorry, the first act writes a check that the third act can't cash.
Jackasses. You know, Joel, when we start trading personal insults, you know what that means. Do you know what I mean?
Almost makes me miss Ozzy a little bit, to be fair. Okay. Well, I've got a fair amount to chew on there. I believe you've got a quiz for us, Alex.
I do.
On, Alex, is it Killer Priests by any chance?
It's not Killer Priests, Dave, but it is Killed Priests. This is a quiz. This is a quiz. I started doing a quiz about priests, and I realized that the first three questions were all basically the exact same. How does this priest die? So this is a quiz not about killer, but killed priests. So to start us off, how does Father Brennan die in The Omen?
Bam. Oh,
Dave.
He gets impaled on the spire falling from the church steeple, doesn't he?
He certainly does. Well done, Dave. How does Father Barry die in On the Waterfront?
Bam. I can't remember. A heart attack.
Not a heart attack, no.
Did you bam to say you can't remember?
Nobody else was batting.
Panicked. Carl Malden, do you remember?
Yeah, I remember. I've seen On the Waterfront. I loved it. I can't remember how.
He gets pummeled to death.
He does not get pummeled to death as good as it would be. Right.
Drowns on the waterfront.
He doesn't drown on the waterfront. Well, that would have made a lot more sense. I'm sure if anyone's still alive from On the Waterfront, they'd be kicking themselves now.
Abducted by aliens.
No,
he chokes at a hot dog eating competition.
I'm going to stop you here, guys. I'm going to stop you here. He is crushed by a crate when it's being moved on purpose. The mafia drop a crate on him as it's being unloaded. How does Father James die in Calvary?
Can't remember now.
Does
he gets shot, doesn't he?
He does. Well done, Gab. He gets shot twice. Do you remember who shoots him?
Is it spoiler alert? Chris O'Dowd.
It is Chris O'Dowd. Well done. How does Father Hennessy die in Constantine?
Bam. He essentially drinks himself to death, doesn't he?
He certainly does. He's tricked into drinking himself to death. Well done. You know your priest F, Scab. How does Father Karras die in The Exorcist?
Bam. Heart attack.
No.
He is possessed by the demon and throws himself out of the bedroom window and falls down the stairs.
He certainly does. Well done, Dave. How does Cardinal Rourke die in Sin City?
Head crushed by Marv.
Yeah. I just wrote he died very, very badly, which I would have existed
in the hands of Mickey Rourke. That is not the way to go.
Yeah. No. By Mickey Rourke's bare hands. Not a good way to go. How does the monk Silas die in the Da Vinci Code?
Bam. He watched the Da Vinci Code and killed himself.
Died inside. No, it's good, so I'll give you a point, but no, it's not true. No, he's gone.
I want to say self-immolation, but
no, again, it would have been better. No, he's just shot to pieces. The next one, how does the bishop die in Robin Hood?
Bashed.
2 points, Gav. But Dave, do you want to get the actual answer?
He is laden up with gold by Friar Tuck and thrown out of a stained glass window.
Fantastic. And last one, it's kind of for Dave here. How does Salvatore die in The Name of a Rose? Dave?
He is burned at the stake.
He is. And Dave, for an extra 50 points, can you do an impression of Salvatore?
Very ugly, like Salvatore.
Yeah, very good, Dave. Dave wins the quiz. Dave wins the quiz. It's my favourite impression ever.
All I got from that is I really need to watch more films with priests in.
Oh, not on your priestess.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, this was certainly an interesting one. I know nothing about this film, so I don't know if it carries a good reputation or not. So I'm kind of freed, if you like, from that burden. I did like a lot of what the defense was saying about it. Kind of sounds a little bit like a slow burner in terms of the tension building up and the fact that, you know, it's not just about pure horror, jump scares and things like that we have in today's films. There's a lot of kind of creeping dread and unsettling elements in this film. And to be completely fair, it sounds very unique as well. The plot certainly sounds like something that I haven't seen before. And it sounds, like I say, very unique. Not many films today would go down that route. I did quite, pay attention to what Gav was saying sometimes, which is a turn up for the books, really, because I zone out quite regularly. But like some of the scenes sound comedic, but maybe that's because of how old it is, and acting and things like that have moved on since that time. But it'll be interesting to see how I kind of react to that, because I don't really watch many old films, and horror, I think, is certainly one of those that ages quite poorly. So I think if a horror film from certainly, like the 50s holds up well today, then it's got to be something special. And to be completely honest, this does sound like it's going to grab my attention. It does sound like a quite a special film, and maybe Alex's passion told me more than it should have done, because I know that he's a passionate man.
Sometimes I just need it.
But it did also sound like Gav didn't have too many bad things to say about it. There are a lot of things kind of based along the plot and maybe some of the silly acting and things like that. But overall, kind of nothing too damning kind of came up. So yeah, I mean, it sounds like I'm going to enjoy it. So I'm quite looking forward to watching it. So hit list.
Is that a happy death scream?
That's a happy male scream. Okay, so genuine opinions. Well, Alex, I think we know what your opinion is about this.
Yeah, it's an absolute stone cold classic. It really is a fantastic film. And I have to say, watching it, I think older and being a teacher, I did get quite personally involved in this film. Like it's taken quite a special little place in my heart, especially the character of Rachel Cooper, who looks after the children. A lot of what she was saying resonated extremely deeply with me. So I found it hard to listen to some of what Gav was saying, but I understand he was saying it for the podcast. But I also don't want to see him. I don't want to see him at all for at least a month.
Yeah, I could tell that Alex was getting a bit annoyed there, and I was like, "What do you want me to do? I'm supposed to be prosecuting this."
I know. I couldn't help it.
And Dave.
Yeah, absolutely the right decision. This is a classic. It is a superb film. It's got its flaws, absolutely, as all films do, but the performance from Robert Mitchum is just one of the best performances you're ever going to see on screen, quite frankly. And I stand by what I said about Charles Lawton. It's such a shame that he was done such a disservice with the distribution of this film and he never directed again. Really is one of the biggest losses in cinema, but at least we've got this. And like I say, it is preserved in the National Archives now, so future generations have it as well. It is an absolute classic.
Okay, thanks, Steve. And Joel, I just want to go on the record here. So if you're still making some notes, can you mark this down? I just want to say, fuck Alex. Fuck Alex.
Wow.
And then fuck Ozzy as well.
Wow.
Fuck, right, it reminded me of a few years ago when we did Halloween Horror Month and we decided to pick Marmite films, ones that are really sort of indifferent, and then Joel rocked up with fucking Wreck, and I had to prosecute that. And I thought
So
that was
fuck
difficult.
Joel as well, eh?
Yeah,
Who
so
we not
fuck
fucking?
Joel. Dave. So when Alex picked Night of the Hunter, I was like, you fucking fuck. And then I'm watching it, I was like, what the fuck am I going to say about this? And then
In all honesty,
that fucking
it is your own
snake
fault.
Aussie didn't pitch up.
You pick classics like Night of the Witch and that
I
garbage.
picked
Halloween
Demon
3.
Night.
Yeah, Demon Night.
I picked Demon Night and you picked fucking
Pick a
Wreck.
good one, Gav. No, everyone
You
would
know-
like it if you
you know what?
picked a decent film. You pick ones like Suspiria, and you know what I mean?
Ooh,
Like,
Jesus Christ, right? Like, I was annoyed beforehand, but now I'm really annoyed. Next week, I'm going to put The Exorcist on trial, and Alex
Do
is going
it.
to prosecute that. too.
do it. I'll do it.
Right, yeah. It's
I'll do my Max von Sydow impression.
Yeah, it's a very good film. I can't add much more to it than what Dave and Alex have already said. Most of what I was saying was complete bullshit, although I did find the child actors very grating, to be honest. But I mean, there's not many child actors who I don't find grating, but
What
I think
about
that's...
Artemis Fowl?
Artemis Fowl, I think, was the zenith of child acting. I don't think you can get any better than Artemis Fowl. Okay, so I don't even mind. Oh no, I'm going to bother doing this. Higher or lower than our previous film on trial, The Bodyguard, which scored 34% critical
Yeah,
and
right.
64% audience.
Might be a bit higher.
I'm going to go for lower.
Yeah, I'm going
Right.
to say this has got to be close to full marks, surely.
Yeah.
So critical 95% and audience 90%.
Christ.
Yeah. So I think I did pretty well to fucking come up with
You
some
did.
sort of
Well played,
prosecution
Gav.
there.
Well
Thanks.
played.
And fuck Ozzy again, just to underline that. Now, next week's film has not been pulled out of the hat at random because it is the turn of Joel to put a Halloween horror film on trial, and Joel has picked The Taking of Deborah Morgan. No, it's not. That's the character. That's Dexter's sister from Dexter. The Taking of Deborah Logan instead. So Joel, why have you picked this film?
Well, we were just kind of discussing off air then, and you said for kind of possession films, this one kind of stood out as being different, and that's exactly why I picked it. I am notoriously a bit of a wimp with horror films, and this is a kind of a different type of horror. It's not like you jump scares, you kind of sat there behind the couch like shaking. It's just different. You just kind of have to watch it and see what you think. So tune in next week.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Joel. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for all your arguments. And thank you if you've listened to this episode. We really do appreciate it. If you want to check out more Films on Trial content, go on filmsontrial.co.uk. Check us out on Twitter @FilmTrials and YouTube, Facebook and Instagram, Films on Trial. So that is it. The Night of the Hunter is surprisingly to fucking nobody a hit. We're going to be directly in your ears next week with The Taking of Deborah Logan.
That just sounds like your battery's like slowly running out.
Goodbye.
Gotta really put the shitters up the defence.
Put the shitters on.
You can tell I deal with civil law, not criminal.